The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm your host today, Rebecca Miller, along with our co-host, Otto Lohse. Good morning, Otto.
Good morning, Rebecca. It's good
and
to
Happy
see
New
you
Year.
again. And Happy New Year. Yeah, it's been 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Since the last show.
Been a while. And of course, Kristina who is the radio show producer and pulls these shows together every week. And she's also the director of Senior Citizen Affairs for the town of North Hempstead's Department of Services for the Aging. So
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year, Kristina. We have a great guest today, of course. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bill Solz. And Bill is an LCSW CASAC and the director of Stress Solutions New York. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
I love, the solutions after stress. So it's not just stress management, it's like solutions. So that's a very positive thing. We talk a lot about that on the show about positive aging and not kind of, what the decomposing as you get older. Rather, you're rewiring, as Otto, I think, invented that word instead of retiring.
No, actually, I didn't invent it. There's a book about rewirement, actually, that I read. I don't remember who wrote it, but the concept was, I thought, the right idea. You're not retiring. You're not just going to lay on the couch. You're rewiring your life. And I think it's a good mentality to have.
Absolutely. So, well, Bill, thank you so much again for joining us. And before we get into stress management, stress solutions in the new year, we'd love to hear a little bit about you. We'd like to hear about our guest's background and what kind of leads them to where they are today.
Sure. So actually, I had wanted to be a psychotherapist since the time I was 8 years old. So I'm delighted that I was able to achieve my lifelong dream. So why at 8 years old? The reason is I've always been very interested in sports. And at that time, baseball was a passion of mine. And my belief was that players would end up being able to accrue better performance if they had a therapist working with the team. I also felt that if there was a therapist on board, teams go through slumps or interpersonal crises. A therapist could meet with them as a group and again help the players achieve better performance. So I very much went on that path, and I became a psychology major in college. And then my first year in college, the person who was closest to me happened to be my grandfather. And he had an apartment in the same building as I. So we saw each other daily. He was really everything to me. He taught me how to bicycle ride, to play chess, learn algebra, geometry. So in every sense of the word, he was my best friend. And then he had become tragically run over by a car. And at that time, I couldn't focus or concentrate because I was visiting him daily in the hospital. And that lasted for about 10 days before he died. And then I know I had become exceedingly worse, so much so that I could no longer stay in school. And in those days, people didn't drop out of college too often. but I did. And, that also was a personal loss, for myself. And I was fortunate that my parents were sensitive to my needs, and they got me involved in counseling. So I did get better, but it really left me with a bitter taste. The bitter taste being, why did it have to take so long? So, having had that experience, I then really made it my goal, my passion, to learn quicker acting healing solutions. And indeed, that became my new direction. And, I'm happy to say that, I was able to very much achieve that postgraduate. I always resented the notion in graduate school. They would say, well, the first 3 or 4 months, you want to develop a therapeutic relationship, and then you could help the person. And I thought that was so ludicrous because I know from my perspective, clients come to me in significant pain. I always say they come for one or two reasons, inspiration or desperation. Mm-hmm. And I can assure you that 95% come for the latter. And so postgraduate, I ended up first learning hypnosis because I thought that would be able to provide, more rapid healing. However, I really only had success with that in terms of helping clients lose weight or stop smoking. So I was fortunate in 1987, a new treatment approach was developed. It's called eye movement desensitization reprocessing, otherwise known as EMDR. And you can appreciate why. So EMDR actually became the first evidence-based trauma treatment approach that there was or is. And it literally put me on the map as a trauma specialist. So as a result, I ended up being able to experience wonderful, wonderful healing interventions. I had become the primary referral source for the Long Island Railroad. So when engineers kill people crossing the tracks, they'd be so shaken up, they can no longer commandeer the train. And courtesy of EMDR, on average, it would take me 6 sessions to resolve that trauma. And also because of EMDR, I became the primary referral source for TWA and American Airlines. And indeed, when those airlines, Flight 800 crashed out east, I spent the whole weekend at the terminal working with the staff. And in the year of the World Trade Center tragedy, Flight 587 crashed over the Rockaways. And I was involved with staff members from American. And I was also fortunate to have been a first responder at the World Trade Center, not being down there, but they sent many of the individuals who were in the buildings to the Ramada Inn at JFK. And I was meeting with people there on the second day, So I've really had some wonderful, rich kinds of healing experiences. And the reason I say fortunate related to that time, I had been a school social worker for 26 years. But interestingly enough, I had applied a year in advance to take a sabbatical for 2001, just so I could identify if I would be able to see have clients come to me during the day, because I was meeting with clients basically from 4 to 10 every evening. And of course, that year I got a false positive because I ended up seeing clients from 8 in the morning till 10 at night.
Bill, you were called a psychotherapist, and in relation to this, maybe just explain for the people who might be listening what that approach is, and how does that differ from other ways of handling trauma like you're describing?
Okay, so actually, psycho, to say one is a psychotherapist really covers a huge gamut, of different licensures. So by training, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. There are mental health therapists. There are psychologists. Psychologists tend to say, "I'm a psychologist." Other professions, that are really working very much in terms of mental health, on an individual basis, will refer to themselves as psychotherapists. And there's an important differentiation because sometimes people get confused. So I am clearly not a psychiatrist, nor are the psychologists, because psychiatrists are actually trained in the medical profession, and they have the ability to provide medication to clients. Also, nurse practitioners perform a similar role.
Okay. And you have, according to what I read about you, you cover a lot of areas, but you primarily focus on grieving, or
yeah. So I would say first and foremost, I really specialize in trauma, and along my journey, if you will, when I first entered private practice, I was working for an agency, and their client base was primarily related to those who had drug and alcohol problems, along with marital problems. And I was very uncomfortable meeting with couples related to their marriage situations. So I very much came to be involved primarily in the early years with DWI offenders. And then I went for additional training. You had mentioned earlier CASAC, that stands for Credentialed Alcohol and Substance Abuse Counselor. And so I've had that designation since 1990, and and one of the things that I certainly came to learn over the years, that one of the primary underlying issues related to drug and alcohol use is unresolved trauma. As a matter of fact, if you really want to, work with people who have trauma, go to a rehab facility. It's all over the place.
I just I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit more what EMDR is, because I know you had said it's not hypnosis.
No. So there was a psychologist, Francine Shapiro, who is recognized for developing EMDR. And what she had postulated that the notion of moving your eyes bilaterally seemed to be helpful and in terms of resolving trauma. So indeed, what she first used that by having her fingers go from side to side, and then having her clients follow her fingers. And the first group that she ended up using that method with were Vietnam War veterans. And those veterans ended up reporting that they were having less disturbing symptoms, just through the eye movements. And to Francine's credit, she really very much encouraged her practitioners, to do research, to prove that it was so helpful. And indeed, that's why it came to be recognized as the first evidence-based, meaning it's been supported via research, to be clinically effective. It was developed in 1987. I was trained in 1996. And so using EMDR was the primary staple of my practice for more than 20 years. In 2013, a new treatment approach was developed. It's called havening, and like self-haven, but havening. And I was really fortunate that one of my colleagues, who I met in a networking group, who also happened to be a Vietnam War veteran, he had approached me and asked me if I ever heard of it. And I said no. And he said, "Bill, come on, you're a trauma therapist. What's the matter with you?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I never heard of it." Now, his name is Lou Falco. Like I said, he's a Vietnam War veteran, but his job at that time was cleaning houses. And so I have to tell you, I was as incredulous and skeptical as can be. And then Lou said, and he could tell, so he said, "Well, you know what? As a matter of fact, I can introduce you to the co-developer of havening. His name is Steve Rudin." And he said, as a matter of fact, Steve is having a meeting over at his office. And
we actually have to take a quick break, so this might be a good time. We'll come back to havening and learn a little bit about that. You're listening to Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We will be right back.
Take WCWP with you wherever you go with the WCWP app. Listen live 24/7 to all of our streams, all from one app. Plus, call the studios directly from the app and visit our social media. Download the app through the iOS App Store on Apple devices or the Google Play Store on Android by searching WCWP Radio, or visit WCWP.org for links. The WCWP app, available now on iOS and Android devices.
And welcome back to Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm Rebecca Miller, along with Otto Lohse and, of course, Kristina Liu. And we've been speaking with Bill Solz, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Bill, we were just before break. You started telling us about havening. So without any further ado, maybe we could just pick up where you left off.
Okay. So, so Lou Falco mentioned to me that there's happens to be a meeting, and this was a July evening in 2013, and he said he'd be able to introduce me to its co-developer. So I said, okay, I was interested, and I said, "So who's going to be there?" And he said, "A couple chiropractors that I know," and I said, Where's the office? Oh, Steve Rudin is a dentist. So So this only became more curious and curious to me, and I'm just thinking this whole thing is a farce. So anyway, I did go to the meeting, and Steve happened to like my background as an EMDR clinician, and he gave me a scholarship to attend the first ever training in New York City, and that was in October 2013. And I got to tell you, that weekend training proved to be life-changing for me. So, as a matter of fact, I was going through major trauma in my life at that time, and often when you go to these trainings, you break up in pairs where one person serves as therapist, the other client, and so I ended up addressing that trauma, with this person who's newly being trained, and I had become completely blown away by how much I had changed literally that night. So it turns out it was one of these hot, humid days in October, probably about 80 degrees. And as I was addressing that trauma, ultimately, when it was over, I just had beads of perspiration, on my cotton shirt. So for me, what it signified was the fact that I had internalized so much anger that it actually was able to come pouring out of my skin, in the form of perspiration. And literally that night, I made significant behavioral changes because apparently that anger had very much prevented me from going forward. So, and then on the Monday after the training, I introduced havening to each and every client that I subsequently have had. So havening works more rapidly than EMDR. Havening, unlike EMDR, provides the individual with the ability to learn and thereby use it on their own. So I have come to regard havening as, the gold standard in terms of addressing trauma, as well as self-emotional regulation. So
I'm sorry, but you, this is like really interesting. And from a layman's perspective, all right, it sounds like you mentioned earlier, you go through normal counseling, you go through 3 or 4 months of chatting and talking, and for people trying to get a feel for you and kind of talk your way through whatever problem you have. And what you're describing is really not revolved around any of that kind of thing. You're not really talking about the problem. You're almost like physically addressing the problem.
Yes. As a matter of fact, what I have come to learn over the years, and I have to say right away, courtesy of EMDR, and then havening certainly supports it. See, trauma gets lodged in a particular part of our brain called the amygdala, and it happens to be a small part of the brain, but the amygdala is responsible for 2 things. One, it's the storehouse for all of our upsetting information. So let's say children who've been bullied in school, teachers who may have put down, children, so any kinds of negative upset gets lodged in the amygdala. Now, the other function of the amygdala is it acts as a sentry, meaning it's on constant alert 24/7 for us in a protective fashion. So for example, if we're crossing the street and there's an oncoming car, the amygdala, reacts much more rapidly than going through the regular thought system. As a matter of fact, the message goes to the brain 4 times quicker than an eye blink, and that warns us, hey, we better get out of the way. So the amygdala ends up being responsible for our flight or fight kind of response. The third kind of response animals have, not so much humans, is they pretend that they're dead, so their prey will just pass them by. And so again, our amygdala is on high alert. So I'll give you an example. So I've done a fair amount of work with combat veterans. And as a matter of fact, Lou Falco is the head of Operations Initiative. And he provides services to veterans who've accrued PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And he's referred, those individuals to me. I've also done many workshops with veterans. And so this was a situation where I was working with a Vietnam War veteran who had been 50 years removed from the time he was in battle. But and he was very motivated coming to my office, and this is obviously pre-COVID. So one day he cancels, and I asked him why, and he said, "It's the rain." I said, "The rain? I don't get it." Here's a guy who had been in the swamps of Vietnam. He had done 2 tours of duty, and I asked him to explain that further. And he said, "It's really not the rain, it's the thunder." And when he said that, I knew what his issue was. So I said, "Tomorrow's going to be a sunny day. Why don't you come into my office and we'll address that thunder?" And sure enough, he came in and I asked him to recall an earlier memory where he heard loud, disturbing noises. And it brought him back to this major battle he was in Vietnam, where 2 of his buddies got killed. He was, so we addressed that memory, and I do something, with my clients where I'm actually able to calibrate effectively their level of upset related to past and current, levels of upset. And sure enough, on a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being the most disturbing upset he could be, when he thought back to that memory more than 50 years ago, it was a 9. So that trauma still was lodged in him at a 9. Courtesy of havening, he left that session at a 0. So,
what exactly is havening? I mean, I just a little more what the process of it is.
Okay, so okay, so what happens is, as I mentioned, trauma lies in the amygdala, and what occurs is there's a neurochemical reaction that links on to that forms when we experience trauma. In turn, that neurochemical reaction links on to the amygdala. Havening, as well as EMDR, have the ability to sever that linkage of the neurochemical reaction from the amygdala. That's why we're able to feel and experience significant relief so quickly. As a matter of fact, the larger part of our brain is the neocortex, which is our advanced thinking system that we have above and beyond the animals. So regular talk therapy, which primarily is cognitive behavioral therapy, is able to effectively communicate with the thinking part of our brain. However, if all the trauma and upset is in the amygdala, it is unable to effectively communicate with that part of the brain. EMDR, havening, and again, courtesy of Lou Falco, I had just gotten trained in another treatment approach called the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories Protocol. And they all deal with what has been stored in the amygdala and are able to achieve much more rapid healing. So related to your question, so what is havening? So Dr. Ron Rudin, a Harvard-trained neurobiologist, happened to notice that babies who were upset, as in crying, seemed to be able to calm down through the warm, soothing touch of their caregiver. So with that, he postulated that the notion of touch was critical in terms of healing. And indeed, that is the foundational element of havening. EMDR does not utilize that. And again, a difference between EMDR and havening. Clients who go through havening have a much more gentle experience, because for EMDR, you're asking the client to go right back into that horrible, worst memory of that event. And for some of them, number one, they don't want to go back there. Number two, they experience reactions which are very strong. It wouldn't be unusual for somebody to even throw up, in a session. That's how gut-wrenching, it can be. Havening, I have yet to experience that kind of reaction with any of my clients because of the soothing component that the touch provides us. And indeed, we're able to do that, directly, hands-on with the client. By the way, I never do, only because I don't want to be accused of doing, inappropriate touching. So my clients self-administer the touch, and basically it entails using your two hands going down from your forehead down your cheeks, and then crossing your arms over from your shoulders to your elbows, and then kind of washing your hands. So it's a very simple, soothing, gentle process. And when you do the havening touch in conjunction with literally just verbalizing aloud upsetting emotions related to that trauma, we have the ability to release it. So, so maybe for that individual, the Vietnam War veteran, let's say prominent emotions would have been scared, angry,
I'm sorry, but like when you describe your first exposure to this, and you went to the meeting in the dentist office and whatnot, you had a reluctance. And I could visualize people who really have no clue what havening is, that you would have a reluctance. Like you probably, from your position, have a challenge to overcome in the sense that people may have difficulty buying in on the concept. Because just like you described, you had difficulty buying in, and you had training and more experience. And I'm just thinking, as a normal person who doesn't have that kind of background, it might be difficult to accept that by doing self-touching and whatnot. How do you overcome that? It's just kind of curious.
Okay, so by the way, I'm trained in a number of areas, and each specific area, I start off being very skeptical, and so I'm a believer in seeing is believing, and I don't know. I really would be hard pressed to imagine people being more passionate about havening than myself. As a matter of fact, I know after I learned it, I've been doing multiple workshops, not only with clinicians, but potential clients during the pandemic. As a means of giving back, I provided monthly, no-cost stress reduction workshops featuring havening.
Okay, we actually have to take a quick break, so we will be right back with Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. We'll be right back in just a moment.
WCWP is your home for great music and great conversation. You'll find all that and more on WCWP.org. Listen live on the web, check out the lineup, subscribe to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest station events. Get in touch with us and let us know if you like what you're hearing. And find out how you can support or get involved at the only community public radio station serving Nassau's North Shore. Plus, sign up to get a free bumper sticker. It's all online at WCWP.org.
And welcome back to Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio on 88.1 FM and WCWP.org. I'm Rebecca Miller, along with Otto, Lohse, and Kristina Liu. Our guest today is Bill Solz, and we're a very interesting guest and learning all kinds of therapeutic therapies for people. And before we continue, because we do want to talk about stress solutions in the new year, and it's a great time to kind of kick it off with, some great suggestions and recommendations. And before we do, just wondering, anybody who's listening to the show, because this will be archived going forward as well. First, are you taking on new clients? And also, what's the best way to get in touch with you if you are?
Yeah, I am taking on new clients, and I still put in many hours in my practice. Working full time, Monday through Friday, usually starting at 9, ending at 7, and so I could be contacted. I think the easiest way would be via email, and my email address is stresssolutions, that's plural, and 3 S's in the middle, ny@gmail.com. My website is stresssolutions.ny.com.
Okay.
I also have a phone number. It's 1-800-LESS-STRESS.
Bill, I went on your website, and one of the things I found pretty interesting is you have a bunch of questionnaires on there. And what I would, in my mind, describe it as you're self-analyzing where you stand, you're self-assessing your situation as far as stress goes. And I looked at the questions and I'm saying to myself, what this is doing is really making somebody really think about their situation and self-analyze where they stand. So I thought that would be worthy of mentioning because I think if somebody walks through some of these things, you'll realize you do have stress or you don't have stress.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, I was saying just before the break that I do lots of workshops, and one of the things that I'm really fond of relating to is what I call my pot concept model of stress, meaning that each of us has a certain amount of accumulated upset. And if we could visualize that being in a pot, when, the water represents that accumulated upset, and when we experience additional stressors, it's like putting logs on the fire. When we experience trauma, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. So, and which of course causes us to bubble over. So the bubbling over ends up becoming the equivalent of symptoms that we experience. So usually, number one, related to it is people start having sleep related issues, difficulty falling asleep, interrupted sleep, shortened sleep, too much sleep, bad dreams. We see heightened anxiety, depression. The last few years, for some reason, I've been getting a lot of clients who've been suffering with panic attacks. And again, this is all representative of, of the water bubbling over. And so for me, even before I meet the client, number one, I have an intake form where I'm interested in finding out what the client goals are, as well as identifying information. Two, I have a stress assess form that asks them to respond in terms of how their level of upset is manifesting itself. And as you know, there's a whole host of psychosomatic symptoms. People can have gastrointestinal related issues. People who have Crohn's and colitis, and I've done numerous workshops for CCFA, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation. They experience horrible flare-ups, again, where they're feeling out of control. Those individuals who are able to experience havening are actually able to learn that they have the possibility of more control, where in the past they felt they had none. So the other form that I have is a trauma history form. So I'm interested in knowing what other kinds of traumatic memories they've had. Because, one thing that, we've learned is that current trauma tends to Velcro on top of earlier unresolved trauma. So, as a matter of fact, I'm always interested in really addressing the core issues, for the client. So maybe they're coming to me because of a recent loss that they've experienced. However, maybe 20 years ago that they suffered a more extreme loss. Let's say it's a close family member or a tragic loss. And you know what? If I address that earlier episode from 20 years earlier, the current loss feels less. So we're able to resolve past and current upset. You know, and again, I think the important thing for your listeners to know is that if they have experienced the trauma, you know, more often than not, you know, in our society, we think of it as doom and gloom, you know, and it's all bad. However, the reality is that with the proper kind of treatment, believe it or not, it can actually get rather easily resolved. So the individual need not be immersed in helplessness and being stuck the way they are.
You used the
So,
word individual, and I think that there's so much power in that word, believe it or not, in that everybody reacts differently to stress. Like there's an epidemic of mental health going on right now with students and whatnot because of COVID and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. And yet there are a lot of people who got through COVID and it didn't really impact them that badly from a stress perspective. Yet other people, individuals, because we all come with a different set of equipment,
Mm-hmm.
have a problem reacting to how to handle that. Uh, is the current scenario that's going on something that you believe havening would apply to?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, as a matter of fact, you know, as I mentioned, I was doing those monthly free workshops, and why? Because uh, COVID represented another major trauma that everybody was experiencing. And as you say, some people are more devastated than others. But part of the reason those who have been more upset and devastated, as I use, is because they have a whole host of earlier unresolved trauma. And just tacking uh, the whole COVID epidemic on top of that caused them to spill over.
I have a question. This is kind of not from left field, but I'm very interested in this relationship of social media, the addiction to, I don't want to say addiction because we don't know if it's an addiction, but, you know, certainly in the younger generation, people are constantly on social media, immediate satisfaction, not waiting, having answers. So, you know, I mean, I think like part of the brain that, you know, developed for us who grew up without social media and being able to look up someone's name in a second instead of trying to figure or recall or go to a library. What is, like, is there, I don't want to say a mental illness impact from social media and not really having parts of the brain develop like you know, we did as younger people? I'm just curious. I'm interested to know your kind of, you know, perspective on that.
Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, yeah, your question's very interesting in the sense I had attended a workshop. Oh boy, his name escapes me, but this guy is a giant. He's a neuroscientist who specializes in addiction. And, you know, I can never get tired of listening to him. So, what he does is he studies what are called PET scans. PET scans are uh, picture representations of the brain in color. And I was astounded by this finding that he shared with us. And he showed us the pictures, you know, that people, for example, who are on cocaine, highly addictive, you know, the brain lights up in all kinds of red. Guess what? People who were addicted to this video program called Fortnite actually
Oh, yeah.
lights up more. than those who are on cocaine. That's how highly addictive, some of the things that are being experienced, nowadays, particularly by our youth. And that's why one of the biggest things a parent can do is prevent them from using their electronics. That's like the worst thing. No,
we don't really know, right? I mean, we don't really know the long-term effects, and we don't really know at this point if it's changing the way the brain develops, if it evolves, because you're not really utilizing, I guess, I mean, we don't really know all about the brain, but, I'd be interested to see the difference of like someone, a person our age brain in terms of development.
But the word you just used before is a buildup of trauma, which, again, from a complete layman's perspective, I think we all have a different capacity for trauma. And if if you've hit your capacity, whatever it is, that's your capacity. And I think that social media, if used incorrectly, or the news, if used incorrectly, provides a series of traumas. Maybe a kid is bullied, or maybe they got, to them it's a trauma because they didn't get 98 in a school test. They got 96 or whatever. This to them is a trauma. And these are all maybe seem, and relatively speaking to me or somebody else, like, who cares, But you use those words, and I think the buildup of trauma can be a series of small stuff as well. And social media is like an all-day affair, and there's going to be some bad stuff on there. And it's like, and if you watch the news all day, which I have friends who do, they're very negative because that's all they do. They watch the news, and 3/4 of it is negative. So you're building up all these traumas. Anyhow, I think it fits with that whole thing.
And you're very correct about it. The other aspect, courtesy of social media, is that it has the ability to spread like wildfire, and as a matter of fact, recently I've been working with someone who had been ostracized wrongly by another kid, and he shared this with all of his people. And guess what? This client ended up experiencing being shunned by a huge number of people based on totally misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, the more I think about what we're just talking about and the social media part of it, the building up of trauma, you hit me with some key words there, in my opinion. And that's relative to the person and what you consider a trauma. You don't have to have somebody die in front of you to consider it a trauma. It could be you got shunned by one person, and that's a trauma to that person.
One of the things I was kind of thinking about too is, because of the use of social media, and not always the negative aspect of it, the fact that you can research, get answers quickly from a very young age, you're able to do it. Yeah, I wonder if the brain is developing differently. Like, we don't use our pinkies as much, so it's not growing. So does that atrophy and not like shrink? And, what are we doing? And is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, technology is not going away. So these generations that are brought up on it, that's what they're going to grow into. So.
Yeah, no, it definitely impacts the growth of the brain. I had this experience not too long ago where I lost my cell phone at an airport. You know what?
That's trauma.
That's trauma.
Oh God!
They were able to overnight it to me after I tracked down where I thought it was. But however, for the 2 days till I got my cell phone, I didn't even realize how dependent I am just for my cell phone to take me to places that I've been familiar with, like going to a doctor's appointment who I've been maybe 100 miles, 100 times. You know what? All of a sudden I was at a loss. How do I get there? You know, and again, that part of our brain is no longer stimulated.
Right.
You know, yes, we would need to figure these things out.
I know. Unfortunately, we have to go to break. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and such wonderful information. You did give out your contact information. If you weren't able to jot it down, you can always call 311 or 516-869-6311 and ask for Kristina or myself, and we will definitely be able to get you that contact information. So again, thank you so much for joining us with Project Independence in You. I sure Kristina's going to book you again, and we'll have you back, that's for sure, if you'll join us. You're listening to Project Independence in You, 88.1 FM and WCWP.org.